Hey there, island dreamers, locals, and anyone craving a slice of paradise. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time, to the Fun in Key West podcast, where the vibe is always laid back, the stories are salty, and the drinks, well, they're definitely frozen. I'm your host, Michele O'Connor, your unofficial tour guide to the Conch Republic. Whether you're planning your first trip, your fifth trip, or you're just daydreaming about trading the cubicle for the ocean breeze, you are in the right place. Here's the deal. This podcast is your insider's guide to all things Key West. We're talking where to eat, hello, conch fritters and key lime pie, where to drink, spoiler alert, there will be rum, where to stay, and all the quirky, wonderful things that make Key West the one-of-a-kind paradise we all love. Plus, we'll keep you up to date on the latest happenings, festivals, events, maybe even the occasional Hemingway look-alike sighting. And just to keep things spicy, we'll be bringing on some amazing guests now and then, locals, business owners, and people who know the island like the back of their sandy hand. So grab your flip-flops, pour yourself a cold one, and let's escape to the island state of mind together, whether you're tuning in from your hammock or your commute, while wishing it was a hammock. We've got all the Key West goodness coming your way. Thanks for being here. It's going to be a lot of fun in Key West. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of Fun in Key West Book Club podcast. So, have you ever dreamed of ditching the 9-to-5 grind, moving to a tropical paradise, and spending your days surrounded by sunshine, salty air, and rescue dogs? Yeah, I think all of us have. But today's guest didn't just dream it, he did it. After 30 years in the Army, Tony Soika traded combat boots for flip-flops and created a straight life out of a movie. He's the author of Pit Bulls in Paradise, a gripping Key West mystery that's equal parts heart, grit, and island vibes. From rescuing dogs to writing novels, Tony's journey is as inspiring as it is unexpected. So grab your iced coffee, kick back, and let's dive into this incredible story of second acts, furry friends, and finding purpose in paradise. And oh, by the way, my microphone had a little bit of issues, so just bear with it. It gets better as the episode goes on. Welcome, everyone, to the Fun in Key West podcast. And today is another episode of the Fun in Key West Book Club, where we interview authors that have books highlighted in our book club. And today is no exception. So I am so excited that today I'm going to bring a conversation with you with author Tony Soika, the writer behind Pit Bulls in Paradise. And this is the first book in the Conch House Chronicles. And Tony has one of those backgrounds that instantly makes you just lean in. He's a retired U.S. Army officer with 30 years of service, multiple combat deployments, a deep love for dogs, and a strong connection to the Florida Keys. And before I go any further, Tony, thank you so much for your service. And you're welcome. I mean, all of this shows up in Tony's writing and the way that makes it feel grounded and personal and very real. And this book, Pit Bulls in Paradise, introduces us to John Tuttle, a retired Army officer, we're going to get into this, who comes to the Keys looking for peace and only to find himself pulled into something dark and mysterious, and he uncovers some cruelty and realizes the system may not be able to fix it. And today we're going to talk about the man behind the book, which is Tony, and what inspired the story, and why Key West makes such a powerful setting, and why this series is so much more than action on the page. So, Tony, welcome. I am so glad that you are here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So give us a little bit of a brief overview of who Tony is.
So, wow, as old as I am, that's not. I retired from the Army in 2019. One of the medals that I earned while I was on active duty was called the Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal, which I got for a little bit less than 500 hours of volunteering with different animal rescues and animal shelters. It's funny, if I were to pan around the room, there's a dog in every direction. I've got 4 of them sitting around me. So, between being a dad, being in the military, and being a dog dad, really is kind of consolidates all that I am.
And I think that clearly is reflected in the book. But before we dive in to the book, give me some sort of what is it about the Florida Keys and Key West that keeps pulling you back into that area and that place in the world?
Sure. I'll tell you, I live here in Florida, and I often joke when I meet somebody, the first thing I ask is, where are you from? Nobody in Florida seems to be from Florida.
Mm-mm.
And I'm no different. I grew up in Minnesota, and while it was a very wholesome place to grow up back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I first saw Key West in August of 99. And I remember just being fascinated by, a water spout or tornado at sea, or, I was in Fiesta Key up around mile marker 71 or so, and I was fishing, and a lobster came out from under a rock and was picking at the bait on my hook. And, nobody on my block in Minnesota ever got to sit and watch a lobster in the wild do stuff like that. And to a conch, that may be old news, or if anything, it's a negative thing because he stole my bait. But I just sat enraptured at the purity of what the Keys were. There's a lot of places in the world that are pretty, but it's not just how it looks, it's what it is. And I was just pulled in immediately.
Yeah, I think all of us are. So what was interesting is I interviewed DJ Peak, who is the owner of Key West Candles and Bath Company, and she happens to be one of the rare people that is actually born and raised in Florida. She's actually a third generation of Floridian. So that was very interesting. And I love your story and in the comment about where you're from, because I grew up in Alaska and nobody back then was from there. So anytime you met somebody, the first thing you said was, so where are you from? And when we moved to the East Coast, it was very ingrained that nobody left the area that we were in. And it was always, so who are you related to? And our first visit to Key West, we were sitting at the bar and the bartender puts the drink down and says, so where are you from? And I turned to my husband and I said, I'm home. I'm never leaving. This is home now. So I think there's a lot of us who actually can relate to that. So beyond this bio and this introduction, you've had such a full life, and before becoming a published author, you've done a whole bunch of things, and you served for 30 years, and you clearly, with that much of experience, it shaped who you are. I'd like to start there for just a minute, not just with the resume version of who you are, but the human version. And when you look back on your life so far, what experiences most shaped you into the person who eventually wrote this book?
It's funny. John Tuttle, the main character of the book, I hope I delivered it enough that you can really tell the love that he has for his son. If you had asked me at 30 or 35 or 40, I would have told you I don't want kids. I'm not a kid person. They annoy me. They're disciplined. And, but my son was born when I was 44 and a half.
Wow.
He's like a little Tim Tebow in that quarterback. He's a 4.0 student. He plays the French horn and band. He's a very well-rounded kid. He won a certificate at his school for having the best manners in his class. Probably more proud of that than any touchdown he ever threw. And, so it was one of those where being a dad just really consumed. He's my best friend. I admire and respect him and love him to death. And so this book was the first of a series. And what I think will happen is, my son is only 12 years old. So I had to kind of project ahead to when the kid to college, and then the main character moved to Key West. But my son in the book, the character's son goes off to the Citadel, which is a military college in Charleston. My son and I have talked about him someday going to the Coast Guard Academy or a place like that. I was an instructor at West Point during his kind of, impressionable years. So that'll probably eventually be a thread where we take the series is, when that person's older, he'll be the next hero, if you will.
That's awesome. And to those of you who are watching, thank you so much for watching us live. If you have questions for Tony, just put them in the comments and we'll make sure that you get your questions answered. Did white always have a place in the back of your mind? And or did it just come out later and all of a sudden you've just had to write this book?
So it's funny. I have a little bit of a two-faced career in that
Mhm.
as you said, I did 30 years in the army, but it was kind of a non-traditional 30 years. I did 5 years first, then I transitioned to the National Guard from active duty so that I could go back to college and
Mhm.
graduate. Um, as I climbed the ladder in the National Guard, I also built a name for myself as a college coach. My bachelor's and master's degrees are both in exercise science. And so I built a career as what's called a strength and conditioning coach. Every college athletic department has a few, and their job is to train the athletes in the athletic department. So um, as I kind of grew in that, eventually one day I was invited to write a book on my field. And at that point, I was off active duty. And, that the further I went down that rabbit hole, it started to get to be a lot like work and it
Mhm.
became a chore. And I thought, I would really like to write a novel. And one day, my dog passed away last summer.
Mm. I'm
There's
sorry.
nothing worse, when your pet
Mhm.
dies. I just thought, life is short. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I pushed the other project to the back burner. And I just dived into a novel where I was the main character. Um, every day, that was a bad or a sad day with the dog having died, I just escaped into writing that book. Um, and in 4.5 months, it was done. It was really fun. It was a challenge, but it was a labor of love. And so that really kind of steered us to this direction today.
That's awesome. And I'm so sorry about the dog. It is tough when you lose a pet. They are a family member, and it is tough. It is really tough. So, Pit Bulls in Paradise seems very specific as a first book in this series. Um, why was Pit Bulls in Paradise the story that you decided to land on first?
It had to be. I'm a dog lover from the word go. I mentioned earlier that I've got four. Four is not even the most that I've ever had. So,
Mhm.
I'm somebody that can never say no to a rescue. And, as I looked at what are the things that encompass who I am, the veteran side of it, the dog lover side of it,
Mhm.
I'm currently going through a divorce. And so the keys had always been kind of where I someday was going to escape to. Ironically, I knew that long before I ever got married. And so, I kind of thought, where do I want to be? What's my paradise? What's my happy place?
Mhm.
What do I want to do when I'm there? I want to be able to relax and live off my pension and, just enjoy life. And so this character does all of those things.
That's awesome. Other than just telling the story, is there a deeper emotional story that you wanted to convey? Is there a reason why you chose the storyline? And if you have not read the book yet, guys, be sure to pick up a copy of it. But I don't want to do a whole lot of spoilers on the book. But is there a reason why you chose the direction you went?
So in the book, John Tuttle has two mastiffs, and my dog that passed away was a mastiff. So that was kind of the tie-in there. There's quite a number of tie-ins from real life to the
Mhm.
book, but in 2015, while I was still on active duty, I was teaching ROTC at Duke University, and I had a business trip where I had to go up to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I
Mhm.
I drove up there. And as I was in the middle of rural West Virginia on my way to Kentucky, a female pit bull ran across the
Oh.
interstate and almost got hit by the car in front of me. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but it wasn't going to be nothing. And
Mhm.
this ends up entering the book. But I pulled over and I tried to coax her over to me, and she was clearly scared, and she darted back across the interstate and almost got hit again. And I could still play it in my head where I cringed, like, oh God, please don't die because of me.
Right.
Um, well, now I'm responsible. And so then I ran back across the road and almost got hit myself. I got honked at. And she stopped and she sat down about 30 feet from me. And I put my hand out for her to smell. And eventually she kind of inched towards me. And then she starts licking my neck, and I'm undoing my belt and kind of looping it around her neck as a leash. And I got her back to the car, and I called the hotel at Fort Knox, and I said, "By any chance, are you pet friendly?" "Oh yeah, we sure are." I said, "Well, I guess I'm bringing my pet." Um, and it's one of those where she was the greatest dog I ever had. She was a sweetheart and cuddly, and pit bulls get such a bad
Okay.
reputation. And the media today steers so much how people think. And I wanted to kind of bring to the foreground that, a dog is a dog is a dog. And I always say there's no such thing as a bad dog. There's only bad owners. Um, so in the book, the pit bulls are, when John is volunteering at an animal shelter, and he starts seeing a rash of pit bulls come in, and a lot of them have throat injuries, which is common in a dog fight. And he begins to put the pieces together that, hey, there's a dog fighting ring going on here. Just as I did with Honey Bear, I named her.
No.
Just as I did with her, he wanted to report it to the police, but in the book, the police tell him we don't have enough to go on. There's not enough evidence. Well, a veteran is normally not the type of person to say, "Well, I tried.
Mhm.
The mission's not done yet. I'm gonna see this mission through." And so that's what he does. And just as I did with Honey Bear, and brought her with, she lived happily ever after.
That is amazing. So now that we've made kind of some background about you, I don't think it's that big of a transition now to talk about your lead character, John Tuttle. He clearly carries pieces of you throughout the book, but he has to stand on his own as a character. So one of the questions I have for you, are you a pilot?
I am. So that
Oh.
was definitely a bucket list item. Back in 1999, I literally wrote a bucket list. There are 32 items on it. Publishing a book was number 22. Learning to fly was number 20ish. So yeah, that's one of my favorite things. And in the book where he talks about how forgiving a Cessna 172 is, and those are all things that stem from my own experiences.
Yeah, that's cool. My dad was a pilot. He didn't keep his license up whenever he retired, but flew in Super Cubs. So truly been everywhere, and could relate a lot to the instances that you note in the book about all of that. So where does John Tuttle start to differentiate and become his own character away from Tony?
So when I began, eh, not to be funny, but when I began writing the book, I was still married. So in the book, he's divorced, and and as I say, I'm kind of going through that now myself. But so and then like I say, in the book, John's son Nathan had just gone out to college. So essentially, when I wrote the book, I was projecting myself about 6 years ahead.
That's awesome. Was there a point in time where you were like, that you started to take him through the story, take him through the narrative, and there were parts of him that surprised you that you came up with?
There were a number of times in the book that when I think back at, a childhood without a father, and a poor single mother and things like that, or, the high school girlfriend that cheated on you, or the job that didn't work out when you were in college or whatnot. A lot of that is built into him, into the
Okay.
book. And, a lot of times if you have a tough childhood, one of the things that always drove me was kind of that belief in the American way that if I work hard, it won't always be like this. And so, here we are at age 56, looking back at, when I was 6 years old, I had a dog that somebody shot and killed
Oh,
because it was walking down the alley. Those are things that I build into the book as he talks about the shaping experiences that brought him to where he is. Those were the same shaping experiences that I had.
that's amazing. And you also deal a lot with John does your character, and I think because John's so closely related to you and your person, that you deal a lot with the work about veterans and the transition that you all make from being in service and then coming out of service. and what happens to the human when you leave service. And there's a lot of conversations that John has in the book about with the dogs, with himself, about dealing with all of that and how they come home and figure out who they are outside of service. And what do you think that you want the readers to take most away from or understand about that transition from military life into civilian life?
One of the hardest things, and veterans speak with each other about this on Facebook forums everywhere, is when a career soldier leaves active duty. For me, I'll never forget. I enlisted on Halloween of 1989, and I got out on Halloween of 2019. And when I took off the uniform, I had a job interview the next day to be a coach at a college up in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And when I went for the interview, it didn't feel like the right fit. And my goal was wherever I moved next was going to be where I moved last. Just to give Nolan, my son, a stable childhood and so forth. Well, when I turned that job down, the next day it felt like the world hit me in the face. I thought, I'm not Captain Soika, I'm not Major Soika, I'm not Coach Soika.
Mhm.
When you're the commander, you're arguably the most important guy in the room. When you're the coach and you walk in the room, you're in charge. And so those leadership roles, you develop an ego of importance. And all of a sudden, one day you wake up and think, the world will be the same tomorrow, whether I get out of bed or don't.
Mm.
And finding that self-identity is a real challenge for veterans. And we all talk about it with each other. So that was kind of where in John Tuttle's case, he moves where he wants to move
Mhm.
to, but gets involved in the local animal shelter and, starts developing friendships at, I have a favorite restaurant in Key
Mhm.
West called the Public Seafood Company.
Mhm.
So, years ago, I guess locals call it the Conch House, but years ago I went to the Conch House and I got to talking to the bartender and he was from Minnesota. And so that always stayed in the back of my head. So in the book, he meets this fictitious bartender who's also from Minnesota and also a veteran. And basically he's trying to rebuild a life of, figuring out what identity he's going to be for the next 30. So,
Yeah, and if you follow us a lot, or anybody else that's on here that's follows me, they know that one of my favorite happy hours in town is the Conch Republic. Just I think we all have a jar full of those wooden coins. And Kelly Smith is saying that she's sorry she's late, but all good vibes. So welcome, Kelly. Um, so we alluded a little bit to this along our conversation so far that you are a dog lover. And what's interesting is the way you weave in, first and foremost, the conversations that John is having with himself and with the bartender about that transition to civilian life and how they find each other. And they have this unspoken kind of communication ability to have this what they need and what they don't need, and what they're struggling with and what they need help with. And the dogs in the book are very aware of what John is going through. And tell me why you made the dogs not just the dog. They actually have personalities, they have names. They're larger than life in the book. And a mastiff in real life is very large. And so I'd like to know why you did that.
I remember when I had COVID one day, it felt like an asthma attack, although I don't have asthma, but I will never forget fighting to get air. And when it passed, I looked over and there was this look of fear on Luigi,
Oh.
my Neapolitan Mastiff's face. Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Um, and dogs read us a lot more than a non-dog owner would ever think. And many is the time that I've been sad about a soldier who killed himself, or um, you know any major trauma, and the dog will read it in a minute and be in your lap or leaning against you on the
Mhm.
couch. And um, so they may not speak English, but they're very in tune to your ups and downs and so forth, and they're tied into those as well. So there is a subliminal message in that book that
Mhm.
um, dogs are good. Dogs make your life better. And so there's some unwritten advocacy for animal welfare.
And I think that also ties into the crux of the storyline is cruelty against dogs and what John decides to do to stop that. So I think that's also that message of they are important and they do not deserve, nothing deserves cruelty. So that's, it's an amazing thing. So I guess the question I have is why was it so important for you to highlight that animal cruelty as the storyline?
Because it felt to me, so often when you see a book about a veteran, a Jack Reacher, or, you see a book about a veteran that's on a hero does good type of thing. It always has some Delta Force, special forces, super secret kind of aspect to it. And there are literally millions of veterans that were conventional soldiers and still learned quite a lot of the tactical side of military operations. And but they're also people. And just as when we liberated, concentration camps, there are some people or dogs that are not going to get what they need if somebody doesn't roll up their sleeves and say, "Not on my watch."
Mhm.
So, I think of the scenes in Band of Brothers when they were liberating the different concentration camps. And I feel the same way when I'm at an animal shelter that, um, some volunteers will go to a shelter and they'll take a dog out to pee and bring it back to the kennel and take the next one and go out to pee and bring it back to the kennel. Um, I may spend 2 hours at a shelter and I might spend that entire 2 hours sitting inside the kennel, cradling a dog, telling him it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's essentially just trying to help people see that connection and that anybody can make a difference. And one of the things you see in animal rescue a lot is nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. If all you do is see a post on Facebook and like it, that means more people will see it. So you did some, but just don't do nothing.
Yeah. Kelly says dogs are very intuitive and are a blessing. And I would agree. So, how do you why Key West works so well for this story? Key West is in the heart and soul of Fun in Key West and the Florida Keys. But there's a lot of people who are like, no, wait a second. Nothing dark and nefarious ever happens in Key West because I never see it. Well, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but we're not ever accusing that there's a Russian people in charge of a dogfighting ring up in the Keys. But why did you choose have it take place in Key West?
So in as much as I love the Keys, and part of what I love about it is the first time I saw Key West 30 years ago, I love the old architecture and things like that with the widows walks and, the things that take you back to the pirate era and whatnot. Um, but there are a number of wide open spaces, whether you have, the back roads of Big Pine Key or things like that, where if somebody were going to do something nefarious, there are places you could pull it off. So as I was trying to tie in all of the things that I love to this book, the keys and dogs and the military and so forth, it just kind of worked that, you notice the dogfighting ring doesn't happen in Key West. You start
Mhm.
getting up Middle Keys. And so I just used my knowledge of the islands to try to figure out how I would do that if I were in that situation.
So were there certain neighborhoods and communities that you wanted to make sure you highlighted and had your reader walk through and understand?
Yes and no. One of the things I wanted to avoid doing was to insult anybody. I didn't want it to be, I didn't want, for example, I've heard people badmouth Big Pine Key. Well, when I was looking at moving there, I looked at houses on Big Pine Key. So I wouldn't have been very happy if I heard people
Mhm.
talking poorly about the country bumpkins that live in Big Pine to be where I could afford. And so it is what it is. But at the same time, I want the book to be real. So you'll notice there's a number of times where it talks about how, he cut down Simonton instead of Duval so he could avoid the pedestrian traffic.
Right.
Um, things like that. I wanted to, or, when he thought he might be being followed, so he ducked into a shop on Front Street and then looked back towards the seaport. Those are things where I kind of put that in there to make it real.
Yeah. And I think without being very specific about places that you're highlighting or streets, you still get that feel of Key West, and you're like, oh, I know where he's at. Even though you're not very specific, you're like, oh, I know where he's at. So as we work through the story, we all know that John is a hero, but what kind of hero did you want John to be?
A reluctant hero.
A reluctant
He was the guy that really would have been happy just shoving it over to the police and going back to work at the rescue. But just like with Honey Bear, you can't go through life saying that's not my job or that's not my problem to fix. Or everybody has to give a damn. And like the world doesn't get any better. And so when the police were unable to help, he even tried going on a ride along, which I used to do when I worked with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office as their fitness director. So I used that experience and built it into the book, where he thought maybe if I go on a ride along and I drop the hints on what I'm finding out, to the officer, he really didn't want to be the guy that was going to go somewhere with a gun and break up a dogfight.
Right.
He would if he had to, but obviously that's a job for the police. So, he's a reluctant hero that's not trying to be the hero. And that was, I think, how we portrayed it in the book.
He comes across very much as a reluctant hero. So what is next in this? This is the first and the beginning of the series. And from what I've heard or read from other interviews that you've done, you're imagining maybe 6, 7 in this, or something along that lines. So what's next? Where do you see this taking us?
So I anticipate the second book. I'm about halfway done with it right now, and I imagine that'll probably be June. Might be ambitious, but hopefully by July that will be published. And that one I'm really excited about. There was I don't want to wreck the whole thing, but a big part of the focus. I had a very good friend that I made in Afghanistan who was a local, and we kept in touch. And when we pulled out of Afghanistan a couple of years ago, he and I were in communications. He was begging me every single day, is there anything you can do? Is there anything you can do to help me get to America? And eventually we got him here, and he's currently settled in San Diego. But I moved heaven and earth to try to make what difference I could. I don't know if I was any help, but at least he got here. But recently, if you recall the shootings up in Washington, D.C., where the 2 National Guardsmen were shot, they mentioned in the course of that investigation that so many people came to America when we pulled out, that not all of them were properly vetted. And so the FBI thinks that there are probably sleeper cells around America that are hunting people like my friend Sadiq, who were working with Americans and then came. So the second book is based a lot on a similar situation.
Wow. And so we'll be anxiously awaiting that next version. And that's that next book in the series. And we were looking at maybe June, July, sometime this year, right?
Yep.
Sometime this year. So you are going to be in Key West next week at Island Bookstore for a book signing. Give us a little bit of information about that.
So I have a signing at Morning Joint up towards Square Grouper. That'll be at the top of my publisher. I believe that's the 26th. And then the 27th will be at the Island Bookstore, which I have to give a shout out. Suzanne has just been great. I was down there last October when I was getting ready to publish the book. And I walked in there just because I love her store. I always come out of there with far more books than I'll ever hope to sell. But I mentioned to her, at the time that I'm getting ready to send my manuscript to the publisher, and would you ever be interested? And she was the most encouraging, wonderful, friendly, neighborly. I just couldn't say enough good things. And when I finally got published, I wanted to send her flowers, but I wasn't sure how that would be taken. So, but just such a supportive person, to care about somebody getting that first big project done. Um, and then once we were done and she was offering to have us come back for a book signing, it'll be the 27th from 5 to 7 p.m. So, I'm really excited about that. I know the publisher and her have been in charge quite a bit or I'm sorry, in connection quite a bit. So they'll have that all organized and hopefully we'll see everybody on the 27th.
Yeah. So yeah, I have to tell you, every time I leave Island Books, I walk away with more books than I'll ever know what to do with. But I just get lost in that store and love Suzanne. And I will be showing everybody what she has done. From my conversations with her, she has a Fun in Key West book club shelf. So I want to go check that out. Kelly Smith is asking, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to do a shout out. She says, do you currently have any dogs?
I have 4. Well, following the divorce, 2 of them will remain mine, but the other 2 were my wife's and my son's. But the 2 that I've got here at my house, one is they're both rescues. One is a Catahoula leopard mix. She's really beautiful and had kind of a tough first year. So she's about 17 months old now and spoiled rotten. Her about 60 days ago. And then Maggie was the other one. I rescued her from the Clay County Animal Shelter just west of Jacksonville when Luigi died last summer. So she's about half blue tick coonhound and half pit bull. Just a darling. She's about 30 pounds and sweet as can be.
They all have their own personalities for sure. So I always ask our guest specific questions. So when you land in Key West, what is going to be your first stop for food and where and what are you going to order?
So, it's funny. The first thing I do when I land, and not to be a hater, but I wish they hadn't upgraded the airport because I used to love that you would get out on the tarp.
Me too.
Minute that door opened, I would go, smell out there. And I don't know why you don't get that in Northeast Florida. I live in St. Augustine. So, but I always take a deep breath when I get off the plane. But the mahi sandwiches blackened mahi sandwiches over at the Conch Republic Seafood Company are my little slice of heaven. So I like going there. There's a bartender / server named Shelby that is a former volleyball player. And like I say, in my background, training athletes, I always strike up a conversation with her. But yeah, I just really love that restaurant. And then when I was there in January, there was a new bar that opened called Kava Key. And it's at 420 Fleming Street. And it's a non-alcoholic bar, to my knowledge. But they serve drinks that have either kava, kratom, or THC. And I've found kratom has just been a miracle cure for PTSD for me. So, I really love that place. And then
And Mr. Coffee, you can tell my dog has decided that he's going to tell me that the mailman is here. But Kelly Smith says about your story about your dogs, that is so awesome. All of her babies are rescues as well. And she just says, thank you for being so awesome.
Wow. Well, thank you so much.
And she loves sloppy joes as well. So the question I had, though, is you get up in the morning and you go for coffee. What's your coffee order and where do you get it?
So there is a traditional coffee shop in St. Augustine that was actually just voted money since it's only been open about 2 years, but it was voted the #1 coffee shop in St. Johns County, and it's called Pour Mike's, Pour, like you're pouring coffee. So Pour Mike's, they have a drink called a Happy Camper, which, let's see if I can get it right. It's honey, cinnamon. It's kind of a quasi latte, honey, cinnamon, vanilla. I always get sugar-free vanilla because fitness. And then I get almond milk because I'm lactose intolerant. So I hope that doesn't ruin anybody's impression.
I don't think so, but I'm hearing a lot of connections between you and John for sure on your orders. Um, so I think we can all agree that there are some amazing places that you highlight in the book. I think Conch Republic is one of the ones that always sticks out with me. I could truly relate to sitting at the bar, having the sandwich, having the iced tea, enjoying all of the conversation and the views and just people watching. It's one of my favorite places to people watch. But as we wrap up, what is one thing you want everybody to know about the book, or something else we didn't cover that you want to let people know about?
Sure. The nature of the book, this is not just some shoot 'em up macho military, it's not a Rambo book. To me, I wanted this book to kind of have something for everybody. And,
Mhm.
it's funny, I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of ties to real life. A number of the characters in the book, Michele and Ellie, our baristas, had 4 mics. Um, the uh, John's son is named Nathan Hale Tuttle. Years ago, we had a baby die in childbirth,
Mm.
and we were going to adopt. My son's name is Nolan Ryan Soika. So he's named after somebody, and we were going to name, if we adopted a boy, we were going to name it Nathan Hale Soika. So this was a little bit of a shout out to that. But the book has heart and the book has meaning, but it also has some excitement. And, it's kind of one of those, if you're a dog lover or if you're a veteran or if you're just somebody that likes to read, I wanted it to be intriguing for multiple different communities. And um, I'm frequently asked, what's your target audience? And that's something with this book is there's 3 or 4. And I feel like, if people give the book a chance, I think they'll really fall in love with the series.
Yeah, I mean, I read through it pretty quick, and there were a lot of people who reached out to me to say, "Hey, I read it in a real quick sitting," and now that they're excited about that this is a series, and they'll be able to learn and explore more and see and get more into the characters. There is one real character though in the book, and that's Captain Dan, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's funny. Back in '99, well, as long as I've been coming to the Keys, I have gone fishing with Captain Dan. That man knows he's forgotten more about fishing than I'll ever know. But I've never been skunked. And if you're somebody who gets seasick, he typically does the backwaters where it's shallow and flat. And we'll
Mhm.
still catch a 6 foot, 200 pound shark. And I mean, he's an amazing man. Um, and he's as much family as he is, a charter boat captain. So, and I do the same thing in this next book. I mention a lot of real places in Key West. I mentioned Dennis, the owner, and Kava Key. And
Mhm.
so, I really try to kind of give a shout out to places that are special to me back there.
That's awesome. So, Tony, this has been such a great conversation. And I think that Pit Bulls in Paradise gives readers the opportunity to explore the Keys, explore Key West, learn a little bit more about how dogs are actually part of our world and should not be, we shouldn't have a world without them. And I like the fact that you're not pigeonholing this book into a specific type of genre. Like you said, it's not a action. It has action, but it's not a shoot 'em up. It's not, a thriller. It's something that is a story that engages all of us. And I think you're right. I think there's something there for everybody. But and it also allows us to go into some of those deeper conversations and really look at our dogs a little bit differently after we've read the book. For everybody listening, be sure to check out Pit Bulls in Paradise. And this is the first book in the series of the Conch House Chronicles. And I want you to follow Tony Soika on all the socials because I'm sure you're there. And what's the best way for them to find you if they want to follow you and be able to be aware of when the next books come out?
Sure. Southernmost Storyworks is the name of the publisher, and they've got a Facebook page. And I understand Sarah and the gang over there all keep it pretty regular. So yeah, there will be a lot on there, and then also on Amazon, you can follow me as an author.
Awesome. Well, Tony, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. If you were watching us live, if you're watching us on the replay, thank you for watching or listening to the podcast. And Tony, I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. From the Army to the Florida Keys, from saving dogs to writing novels, Tony's story is proof that it's never too late to rewrite your own narrative. Whether you're inspired by his passion for animal rescue, his love for the Keys, or his ability to turn life's challenges into art, one thing's for sure. This guy's life is a masterclass in living with purpose. Don't forget to check out Pit Bulls in Paradise and keep an eye out for the next installment of the Conch House Chronicles. Until next time, remember, life is too short not to chase your dreams, or a rescue dog or two along the way.